we've made it once again to another Christmas Eve, and I hope that the stockings are hung by your chimney with care and that you've locked up the extra strength eggnog so your problematic uncle, aunt, brother-in-law doesn't get too hopped up ahead of the Christmas dinner. I myself will likely be winding down for the next few days to take stock of the year that's been and to binge some much-loved holiday classics. But before I leave you till 2025, I figured I'd cover one more movie to see the year out, and honestly, this one's been a bit of a long time coming. So way back on New Year's Eve 2018, I uploaded a review for the 1997 cult holiday horror comedy Jack Frost. It was a little bit of a late upload because at that time my partner was in and out of hospital, so it was pretty much a case of get the video done and out the door as quickly as possible, but the plan had always been to cover Jack Frost 2, Revenge of the Mutant Killer Snowman, within a year or two of covering the original. Well, my partner's health got worse through 2019, meaning that the one season that ran in 2019 was very on the fly and ended with a Christmas film that I just so happened to have been watching that year, which was Black Christmas. Then, in 2020, a certain global event went down, which caused me issues while trying to get my hands on a Blu-ray for Jack 2 in time for Christmas, so instead I decided to give Silent Night, Deadly Night a go. As for 2021, things still weren't great on that front, and I got my timings messed up, meaning that Jack 2 arrived just after the window I needed it for, so I covered Silent Night, Bloody Night instead. 2022, I just went, sod it, I'm doing Silent Night, Deadly Night 2 because...
Garbage Day! Huh? No!
Finally, I put Jack 2 on the dock for a 2023 review, and then a load of my family just decided to randomly die. It just really can't catch a break. Well, it's 2024, and after much delay, I am finally going to be taking a look at 2000's Jack Frost 2, Revenge of the Mutant Killer Snowman. And after a nearly 6-year wait, I had relatively high expectations, which... well, you'll see. The original Jack Frost was a horror comedy. Horror was very much the leading genre, but the comedy was a much-needed underlying element that really helped to tie the production together. Jack Frost 2 is a comedy horror. It's predominantly leading with comedy, but with a horror element laying a nice contrast to the Looney Tunes style comedic runarounds. And believe me, this thing is absolutely a live-action cartoon and is totally unapologetic about that. So the film opens with Sam, our lead protagonist from the first film, recounting the events of the first film in detail to his therapist. A year has passed since the events of the first Jack Frost, and after months of trying to get Sam to process what happened, the therapist suggests that it might actually be beneficial for him and his wife Anne to spend Christmas this year away from home. Ideally, somewhere tropical because, obviously, you don't get snowmen in tropical climates. Sam's reluctant, but an opportunity presents itself when his best friend, Joe, announces that he's getting married on a tropical island around Christmas time and he wants Sam to be his best man. Sam's still quite against the idea, but Anne manages to twist his arm and guilt him into going. While this is going on, however, 2 hired thugs have travelled up to an unmarked grave where Jack, who was dissolved by the antifreeze in the last movie, was bottled up by Sam & Co. and buried for the public safety. They're here to reclaim the bottles on behalf of 2 scientists who wish to experiment with the tainted antifreeze for some reason that isn't fully explained. Anyway, after getting the bottles and running some initial tests, they decide to call it a night and head home. While they're gone, however, a clumsy janitor enters the lab to clean up, and while not paying attention, he spills an entire mug of cocoa into a vat containing the antifreeze mix. This abundance of warm holiday cheer reactivates the frost parts of the antifreeze, causing Jack to be rapidly resurrected. He blows open the glass tank, impaling the janitor, and flees the scene by turning into water and sliding down a floor drain. We then arrive at the Tropicana Hotel, a luxury resort aimed at helping people unwind, relax, and most importantly, have fun. We're introduced to our 2 leading staff members for the hotel, the Colonel, a doddery, Colonel, who's quite military-minded and enjoys rambling about his adventures in India, and Bobby, a smart and somewhat laid-back bartender. The pair greet the guests at the entrance and were more formally introduced to the rest of the guests for this movie. There's Sam, Anne, Joe and his wife, as we know, but also joining us on this trip are 3 young girls called Rose, Ashley and Paisley, who are on their first no-parents vacation and are looking to party, have some cocktails and maybe find some hunky guys to make memories with. There's also a photographer and 2 models along for the ride who are travelling to the island to shoot an erotic calendar. So the party's in full swing at the Tropicana Hotel with karaoke, dancing, plenty of booze, and a guy called Captain Fun whose only mission is to ensure everyone's having fun, which is a bit of a problem because Sam is still deeply in his own head about the whole Jack Frost thing with Christmas approaching. So Captain Fun has to quite literally drag him into the party to try and snap him out of it. While this is going on, Rose, Ashley and Paisley get to know Bobby. They get some cocktails and start sharking the bar for the hunky guys. Bobby puts them onto a good thing with 2 dude bros who seemingly have an IQ so low it's a wonder they remember to breathe out when they breathe in. The girls use their womanly wiles to get them to agree to come down to the beach for some barbecue and more. The girls head down to the beach and get set up, but the guys are so dumb they literally just forget to go. The girls speculate and debate which of the girls will get the guys, as there's 3 of them but only 2 dudes, and while debating, one of them goes off to find some more charcoal, only to wind up murdered by Jack, who's managed to trace Sam down by travelling through the ocean. He then also picks off the other 2 girls before collecting some charcoal to help with eyes and buttons and such. The next day, over the breakfast buffet, a scream can be heard. 2 holidaymakers have found the crushed remains of our Acme assassinated friends, with the Colonel and Bobby offering them full free room service to just go back to their room and never mention this incident again, which they both happily agree to. The Colonel instructs Bobby to contact Manners at once, as he's the head of the hotel security and this will almost certainly be within his remit. At which point Sam wanders down to the beach and sees the crushed remains, which instantly puts him on high alert, but then only compounding that, Manners turns up and it's none other than Agent Manners, our FBI guy who helped Sam fight Jack in the first movie. Sam instantly tries to pick up with Manners, but he's solidly denying that he's ever met Sam, before putting the murder down to a case of a coconut shark attack, and he advises that all the guests be stationed back to their rooms until the shark or culprit is found. The Colonel strongly disagrees, and they head back to the hotel to call the police. When they get back, however, they find a problem. Someone's disconnected all the phone lines, and on further inspection, it looks like someone's sabotaged the satellite relay, as effectively they're now stranded on the island until tomorrow morning when a supply ship with its own communication tech will turn up to drop off the island's weekly supplies. While the Colonel and Manners call a staff meeting to fill everyone in about the morning's events, Jack ends up spotting the sexy calendar group right as they're shooting Miss December. And after disguising himself as ice in the cooler so that he can find his way into the model's bikini, Jack just explodes the actress's head via exploding ice cubes before taking out the photographer. Later that day, Sam and the gang are taking part in some archery. Manners appears and tells Sam that he needs to have an urgent meeting with him away from the others, and that he'll meet him in the reception in 10 minutes. Once there, Manners finally reveals that he is in fact the FBI agent that Sam met last year, and that he was unceremoniously fired from the FBI after the snowman story came to light because who'd believe it? He's currently working security at the hotel to make ends meet, but he believes there's a murderer around. What Sam didn't know, though, was that Captain Fun is also working with Manners on catching the killer, and that Fun is about to put his ultimate plan in motion to catch the killer. A fancy dress karaoke party. The idea being that if everyone's dressed up, it might make the killer feel a bit more free to go commit some murdering, and it kinda sorta works. Because Sam overhears Jack's voice in the crowd and takes off trying to find him, and in the process, he accidentally ends up twatting the Colonel, who was attending the fancy dress party dressed as a snowman. Sam, Manners, and the group are all heavily chewed out for their antics, and everyone heads to bed to think about what they've done. While everyone's back in their rooms, Jack takes the opportunity to kill a late-night skinny dipper, before going in for his ultimate plan. While Sam and Anne are trying to get some sleep, Sam wakes up feeling unusually cold. He goes to the window and lo and behold, it's snowing. Hard. So much so that Captain Fun wakes everyone up for a late-night snowball fight. Sam immediately knows that this is Jack's doing. Anne is confused, but thinks there must be some kind of meteorological reasoning for the flurry, with the Colonel backing up that theory by saying that in the late 1800s it snowed too. But Sam isn't so convinced, and needless to say it isn't long before Jack's back massacring guests and cracking wise. Sam confronts Jack and everyone retreats back to the motel room to form a plan of action. Manners and Sam both agree to patrol the grounds to look for Jack and to try and find the hotel staff who got separated from the rest of the gang during the chaos. Everyone else is to stay in the motel room and try and find things that'll seal any and all cracks in the motel room or anything that could be used to fight Jack. With everyone in agreement, Sam and Manners head out and eventually find the staff. The two groups cross information and they begin to talk about trying to find a stock of antifreeze to take Jack down. Bobby mentions that there's a tool shed in the back of the complex that has drums of coolant. And so, the plan emerges to once again disintegrate Jack, stop the snow and save the island in time for Joe's wedding. But when things don't quite go to plan and Jack reveals his new and improved snow powers, it'll fall to Anne to lead the rest of the gang against Jack too and save the day. In a rip-roaring hour and 33 that definitely could have been shorter, will Anne save Sam? Will Bobby ever get to make one of his world-famous banana daiquiris ever again? And snow babies? Snow babies! Snow babies. Aww, snow baby. Snow babies! Snow babies and more will be answered if you check out Jack Frost 2. So, as mentioned, for the sequel they've decided to make a comedy horror rather than a horror comedy. And there's a real distinction that needs to be made between those genres, because whatever fronts that genre is the foot that leads. For example, if it's a horror comedy, the film will always largely lead with horror, but it basically gives a free pass to throw a few jokes into the mix, maybe make the villains a little eccentric or overly charismatic. The comedy aspect is played down, but its presence helps to better invite the audience into the film's world, while also adding a little light to what can be a quite dark genre. The problem that comedy horror has that horror comedy doesn't is that you can make a horror comedy and have the comedy aspect fail. A good horror movie with some bad jokes is still ultimately a good horror movie. But if your comedy horror has bad comedy, you're quickly on a one-way ticket to probably one of the most insufferable 90+ minutes of your life. Comedy is of course subjective, so what I find funny you may think is stupid or rubbish, so I can only really comment here on my own personal experience with Jack Frost 2, but I thought the comedy aspect was a little hit and miss. They work a wide range of comedy styles, from slapstick to witty one-liners to visual gags and more. Where it works, I think it really nails it, giving a kind of MST3K style self-awareness to the tone it's trying to play with. But when it misses, it's insufferable. Easily some of the stupidest, basic, dullest, lowest common denominator comedy. I think there are enough gags here to ultimately give everyone at least one smirky laugh moment, but yeah, it's really a movie you've got to roll with the punches on. For me, I felt they handled the visual gags and smart, stupid humour, i.e. stupid jokes that are funny because they were clearly written by some smart people, see most of The Simpsons' early output, quite well. But when the film tries to be quirky or cool with one-liners, and in particular Jack's quips, it's cringe-inducingly bad, and not in a way that feels like it's inviting the audience to cringe along with it. Given this was supposedly all written and directed by the same guy, I really have to wonder whether he just had good days or bad days, because he can write some really genuinely funny moments in one scene, only to then write an absolute stink bomb in the next. It's so odd. On the whole, it's a bit of a problematic script. The film seemingly has a lower budget than the first Jack Frost, so cost-saving measures are in place here across the board. And while it hit the direction and cine more than the script itself, it doesn't get away unscathed. For starters, because they had to downgrade the Jack costume as part of the cuts, Jack isn't actually visually in the movie all that much. Pretty much all of his scenes in the first two acts are POV shots, and maybe a shot of his arm or a carrot to represent he's present is about as good as it gets. He then does get some screen time around the end of the second act, but with the introduction of the snow babies, which were clearly much cheaper and easier to mass produce than to maintain the Jack costume, he basically disappears again right up until the last 5 to 10 minutes of the movie. And even then, he's largely stationary. The snow babies look cheap. They seemingly made 2 to 3 of them to essentially just be hand puppets so that they could do dialogue segments, but the 2 dozen or so that were made for background shots are basically just big mounds of cotton wool with 2 black pieces of plastic stuck on to look like eyes. They seemingly only exist in this film as a way to add an extra layer of peril to the opening of the third act because they didn't want to use Jack, and to slow and pad the film out so that we didn't end up with the final confrontation appearing too early. I won't say they're rubbish because I actually kind of enjoyed the presence here, but it is pretty blatant that they're only here to get the film to 90 minutes and as a possible mascot merch opportunity. Outside of that, the actual plot is a fun enough little runaround, but it is kinda basic. I mean, it's Jack Frost 2. I'm not expecting a multi-layer commentary on the human psyche, but a good chunk of this film is basically just Sam, Anne and the gang doing holiday things, and then in the B-plot, Jack is killing people, with no one admitting it was Jack until the very, very tail end of the second act. I think it would have been nice for it to have just been a little more meta. Maybe it could have played with the idea that Sam genuinely could have been imagining that Jack's hunting him down. Or they could have even dusted off the old gremlin on the wing of the plane Twilight Zone trope and had Sam witness Jack being back and killing people, but by the time other folk turn up to find the bodies, Jack's gone and Sam's left trying to explain the murders and trying to convince people that Jack's real, while also trying to convince folks that he isn't actively crazy. Instead, it feels a little underdeveloped, which, when combined with the somewhat sluggish second act that largely consists of people talking in hotel rooms, really makes the film drag a bit in the back end. The act structuring itself is basic, but pretty sturdy. A good example of well-organised act structuring is to have the narrative flow effortlessly between the introduction of a problem, the characters dealing with the problem, experiencing loss and then finding a solution to the problem, which then transitions to a third act where they use that solution to combat the issue and, for better or worse, save the day. If your film does that well, the audience won't even notice it's happened. When it's done badly, it's clunky, makes it glaringly obvious to the audience about what's happening, and in really bad cases, there won't be an act shift at all. It'll just tonally stay on one level from the beginning up to the resolution. Jack Frost 2 has noticeable act changes. So noticeable, in fact, that I knew when I could pause the film for a tea break because they pretty much announce in the film itself the moments where things are going to pivot. When they figure out a way to fight Jack and the Snow Babies between the second and third act, they literally get one of the characters to say, "Hey, with this we can fight Jack and the Snow Babies." At which point I knew I could pause the film, go and grab a cup of tea and stretch my legs, because that was the signal that the third act was about to start. And this was the marker that if I paused it here, I wouldn't have to worry about remembering plot points. Not that I necessarily had to worry about remembering plot points, because the film reminds you of every outstanding plot thread probably about every 15 minutes or so. What I will say is the act transitions here are pretty much nailed on to the minute. The film's 93 minutes long in its R-rated cut, which is the version I watched for this review, and the first act transitions to the second around 31 minutes in, with the second act transitioning into the third at the hour mark on the dot. This film balances its act structuring, and we here at TYTD have a real appreciation for that kind of craftsmanship. As for the tone, well, it's pitch perfect on trying to be a living cartoon. For better or worse, you will not mistake this thing's consistency for trying to play as Tex Avery as possible. But in doing so, I think it overplays its hand and ends up accidentally underplaying the horror elements. Don't get me wrong, the original Jack Frost wasn't exactly a hack-a-minute affair, but that horror film felt much more grounded, gory and aggressive. Here, the kill scenes are almost entirely segregated from the main story, which really makes things feel quite disjointed narratively. They just aren't as hard-hitting as the original. In fact, this film, at least in the R-rated cut, almost feels like it felt pressured to be harder and gorier than it wanted to be, purely by association of being a sequel to a harder horror film. It gives me the vibes that if it could get away with it, goofy comedically gory kills would be all there was in this film. But because of how things have been set up, it makes things feel like the horror elements were almost out of place amongst all the comedy squashing and over-the-top blood shots. As for the dialogue, it's not great. As mentioned, a lot of the one-liners and attempts at charismatic wordplay really fell flat for me. When the characters were playing dumb, I felt their dialogue really kinda came into its own. But I think the biggest issue the film has from a dialogue and character standpoint is it's very hard to try and get your audience to empathise with a main character still clearly traumatised and PTSD-ridden after the events of a mutant killer snowman butchering half his town, when you contrast that trauma with scenes of your mutant killer snowman disguising himself as ice cubes so that he can rub titty. It's the one push and pull that this film doesn't quite seem to nail, how to get the smart humour and the dumb humour to coexist. It's a genuinely hard task, so I can't blame the writer on that front, but yeah, it doesn't quite manage it here, truthfully. It's clearly trying to be fun, engaging and interesting, and other than the issues I've mentioned, it largely succeeds in doing that and sticks the landing as far as endings go. But I'd say if you have a very strict comedic sensibility, you will probably really struggle with this one. The script was written and directed by Michael Cooney, who we previously discussed on my Jack Frost review. Here, he's flying totally solo, and I feel the film does have a bit of a stronger voice for it in that regard. I'll also take this opportunity to mention that this film was shot in 4 weeks in the summer, and given the part of the country that the film was shot in is renowned for its year-round sunshine, it rained or was overcast for the entirety of the production block, which I bet they were delighted about. It isn't really even any easier on the direction front, because there is in fact 4 ways to watch this film, and each version adds or removes from the experience depending on which you pick. So, for a starters, there's 2 cuts, an R-rated cut and an abridged version. There's not a whole lot of difference between the 2 cuts, it's basically minor edits to remove the gore from the R cut and to cover up some nudity from the skinny dipping scene. But paring back the gore kind of makes the comedy work and flow a bit better, and even though it's only minor trims, it does ultimately bring the runtime down by a few minutes, which again only helps to tighten the whole thing up. So while completionists will probably always go for the R cut to get as much footage as possible, I think the abridged may actually be the better way to see this thing. But then, on top of that, both cuts then have the option of watching the film unfiltered, as it was shot on early digital cameras, or filtered, where they crop the film into an Academy aspect ratio and apply a filmic filter to help it blend in better with the original. To the film's credit, the film filter they use is actually not half bad, but both the filtered and unfiltered versions have their pros and cons. For example, the unfiltered version of the film I think really pops with a good level of colour. It's vibrant, which suits the cartoon aesthetic, and because the footage hasn't been messed around with too much, it looks a bit more naturalistic in terms of picture quality and directional choices than the filtered option. The downside to the unfiltered option is that it shows up every single crack, hole or fault in the entire production. The snow babies look awful in the unfiltered version, but get a bit of a save due to the film noise in the filtered version. So while overall I think I like the unfiltered version more than the filtered one, the unfiltered is much less forgiving. By contrast, the filtered option loses a bit of the vibrance, but it looks a lot more professional as a result. It makes the jump between 1 and 2 feel a bit smoother, and I feel like it actually helps to emphasise most of the directional choices a little better. But of course, the trade-off is you're losing the colour, and because of the way it's filtered, some of the directional choices end up looking a little odd. Because this version was really made more as an afterthought and wasn't taken into consideration during the production. For me, I think unfiltered and abridged is the way forward with this one. It's at least how I'd most likely watch this thing going forward. After all, the colour and comedy is the emphasis, why would I want that toned down? Outside of that, the direction itself, given this is a lower budget shot on digital affair, is actually pretty damn good. Cooney is clearly dedicated to the vision he wanted to create for this one, and even with the limitations of the budget, he's managed to largely make it work with some decent kill effects, some really great colour usage, and impressively for the time, even some early CGI work. It hasn't aged very well, but for 2000 on a low budget, that's really quite something. Cooney here has managed to work with a vastly reduced crew count to deliver an end product that's only real problem is the format that it's shot on. I feel like had they had the budget for film, and had they been available to dress the sets colour-wise for film, this could have looked gorgeous. As it stands, it's a damn good attempt at making it work for digital, and they mostly succeed, but I'm not a big early digital fan, and it's hard to escape the flaws of the medium at that time. Same goes for direction of the cast. Given that most of them are returning from the first film, I feel like Cooney was able to basically pick back up pretty quickly. They all seem to understand the brief and pretty much throw themselves into it wholeheartedly, with only maybe one or two wobbles around set placement and dialogue delivery here and there. The main issue with the cast direction is just that, because of the budget issues, a lot of scenes do ultimately end up devolving into people in a room talking. And because of that, it means a lot of time can be spent with just characters sat or stood in a space, not really moving around, looking off camera to something and basically just making sure they get their lines out and hit their mark. They're really putting their all into the performance, but when you don't really have a lot to do in a scene other than enter frame, talk and leave, it's really hard to try and give your characters a significant sense of presence. As for the cine, it's also pretty good. It's clear Cooney's a dab hand at this aspect because even while being shot on digital, shots are clearly composed, not afraid to experiment, they lean into the abstract and absurdity and deliver an end product that more often than not really manages to nail exactly the tone and vibe the script was aiming for. It's concise shooting with a fantastic arrangement that I personally really liked. Once again, however, it all becomes an issue of funds. Because the Jack kills are isolated from the rest of the picture, it makes it incredibly difficult to sequence build from an editing perspective. I feel like had they had the money to utilise Jack more and integrate him better into the mainline plot, the edit could have been tighter, more consistent and coherent. Instead, here it feels like we're watching a movie that keeps randomly cutting away to another movie every 10 minutes or so, right up until the final act when the two worlds suddenly slam together for some reason, and it just really needed a couple more continuity sequences to help transition between Jack and Sam's stories. I think it really truly would have gone to the next stage with that. Performance-wise, if you're asking me if it's good, no it's not. If you're asking me if it works for the brief that this film's carrying, it absolutely does. All the performances here are slightly stilted, overtly hammy and perfectly campy. They do not conform to traditional acting measures, but by God do they go all out to really try and make this the silliest, goofiest comedy horror they possibly can. And I kinda like the tonal change here. In the first film, I kinda felt the performances were solid but lacking a little soul. Here, by leaning into the comedy, they've given the performances a little more humanity, which I think goes a long way. Christopher Allport as Sam gets a bit more dimension to his character in this film versus the original. Initially dealing with depression and trauma over what he witnessed, he gets to work with a more melancholic character predominantly, but he does get plenty of opportunities to play both silly comedic and straight man comedic, and I think he really flourishes in the straight man role, easily having some of the best moments in the whole film here. He's not quite as animated as I'd like, but he still seems pretty keen on nailing his deliveries, and I think on the whole he has more hits than misses. Eileen Seeley is also really solid as Sam's wife Anne. Taking over from Sam in the third act, she brings a much more casual and grounded approach to dealing with a killer snowman. And I think she gives a pretty nice multi-layered performance, being grounded enough to lead her crew into battle against the snow babies, but adding just the twinge of fear into her deliveries as she's previously seen what she's dealing with. I thought she was great. And I also can't omit David Alan Brooks as Manners here, playing a much sillier but still attempting to be cool role. I think he really understood the brief on this one, and it's a shame that while he is prominent in the film, he doesn't get more interesting things to do, honestly, as seemingly, other than reiterating plot points and occasionally getting the odd moment to comedically double take, there isn't much else here for him. Equally, I was a little bit disappointed by the lack of on-screen time for Scott MacDonald's voice and the stunt lady who was in the Jack costume. As mentioned, Jack doesn't get a whole lot of screen time here, and Scott seemingly had even less to record than the previous film. Basically just being reduced to one-liners that, in my opinion, weren't that great a quality, and the occasional line of exposition. Jack in this film didn't really feel like a character, he just felt like a sentient voice that occasionally was shown as a snowman. He's a bit removed from what we saw in the previous film. It's a notable absence. And finally, the soundtrack. It's midified, stocky-sounding tropical music and Christmas-inspired tropical tunes. It's used fairly well, punctuating appropriate moments across the runtime, but it's really quite generic for the most part and lacked any kind of punch that would have made me sat up and take notice. I should also say that some of the ADR work here was a little ropey, with the snow babies in particular not quite landing as well as they could have for me. All in all, the audio and soundtrack are fine, but there was absolutely room for improvement. Jack Frost 2: Revenge of the Mutant Killer Snowman was released on VHS in the year 2000 by Apix Entertainment. It would later receive a DVD upgrade, also courtesy of Apix, in 2004 via the Cinema Club line of releases. And that's pretty much where it would live for a very long time, until 2022, when it was finally picked up by MVD, alongside the original Jack Frost, which had recently gone out of print at Vinegar Syndrome. Jack Frost 2 was a ground-up remaster from the best surviving source elements, and both it and the original film were repackaged and released on Blu-ray with a raft of extras. Most of them were ported from older releases, but upscaled, but here we have 2 audio commentaries, an interview with the director, a making-of featurette, an interview with Scott McDonald, a music video, trailers, and more. The picture quality is nice and sharp, and the sound is wonderfully clear. It's the best the film's ever looked, and as far as I can see, it's still in print. So if you want it, have at it. I think I hit my exact thoughts on Jack Frost 2 while watching the movie when I audibly said at one point, "Wow, this is the movie Ginger Dead Man wishes it could be." And it kind of is. It's a film that isn't taking itself too seriously, has a clear and unique voice behind it, and is just trying to deliver on a good time with a low budget and its heart in the right place. While I can't honestly say it was a great time, I did have a fun one with this one, and I could easily see myself popping it back on around Christmas time when I want a bit of change of pace from the usual gory Christmas horror fodder. I think if you enjoyed the first one and have a tolerance for mixed ability comedy, you'll probably really quite get on with this one. Those that don't suffer fools gladly, however, may want to look elsewhere. And with that, I'd like to wish you all a happy and safe Christmas. I hope you take the very best of care, and I wish you all a happy and prosperous 2025. Till next time.